This is Tuvalu. This country is tiny. With a population of about 11,000 people, the country is only 26 square kilometers large.
If it's so tiny, why don't we expand it with galvanized square steel?
We're not at that part yet. Tuvalu is a small island, forget that, atoll country in the middle of nowhere. It's an archipelago nation made up of 3 reef islands and 6 atolls. Niu, Nukufetau, Niutau, Nanumea, Nanumanga, Nukulalai, Niulakita and Funafuti, where the capital resides, and Vaitupu, in no particular order. All represented in the country's flag, and oh my, that flag! At least Canada pretends to be a real country. Well, for such a small country, how does Tuvalu keep itself afloat? It mainly exports fish and some coconuts. Yeah, it's kind of a bare-boned country. You know, small size, and that is one of the country's problems, sinking into the ocean. The country's highest point is Niulakita at only 4.6 meters high, and most of the country is at sea level. Well, how did it get to this situation? Though climate change isn't really Tuvalu's fault. Well, a little backstory. I promise it won't be 40 minutes long. The islands were first populated by Samoan and Tongan voyagers traveling through the Pacific, serving as a stepping stone to travel into Melanesia and Micronesia. Funafuti and Vaitupu were Samoan spheres of influence, and Nanumea was under the influence of Tonga. Tuvalu for the most part was skipped by explorers and voyagers, mainly just being eye candy, and a place to get coconuts along the way. Eventually in 1809, a British captain, the Paster, a former colony in New York, named the Funafuti Ellis Islands, named after the owner of the cargo ship, and then named Funafuti the Paster's Island. These guys are so humble, am I right? Peruvian human traffickers used the islands to keep kidnapped people in for mining guano. Literal bird shit. Skip forward a couple decades, Tuvalu, well, now the Ellis Islands, become a British colony under the influence of Fiji, following agreements with Germany to split the Western Pacific. In 1916, the colony of the Gilbert and Ellis Islands was created, being administered in Tarawa, now the capital of Kiribati. World War II comes around, the Japanese didn't manage to take over Tuvalu, though the newly created American Air Force Base resulted in the loss of production of 50,000 coconuts. In 1974, the Ellis Islands had an election to stay with the Gilbert Islands or to separate. The Ellis Islands chose to go their own way, meanwhile the Gilbert Islands were merged with the other island chains to create Kiribati, and the Ellis Islands became Tuvalu on October 1st, 1978. Okay, now that you have a historical background of the country, we are going to skip to the 21st century, with Tuvalu's largest threat, climate change. I don't think I need to introduce it to you since it's all over the news. But to anybody who's living under a rock, around the late 1970s, the planet has been getting hotter and hotter and hotter every single year. As a result, there was a hole in the ozone layer, which is very bad for life on Earth. It's like sunscreen for the planet. So in 1987, every single country came to Montreal and signed the Montreal Protocol, where all nations agreed to regulate emissions. So you most likely know the planet has still been getting warmer, and this is where Tuvalu decided to innovate, by moving to the Metaverse. If you've ever been on the live streaming service Twitch, you'd notice something in the URL, .tv. This is an internet domain, and every country is assigned one, .de for Germany, .ru for Russia, and .iq for Iraq. But Tuvalu got really lucky on this gamble, and was granted .tv, you know, TV standing for television, and this URL got the attention of Twitch, a subsidiary of Amazon. .tv makes about 8% of the government's budget, and considering that the country's only resources are fish and coconuts, it's quite a good deal. But what if I told you, Tuvalu is going even further, becoming a digital nation? Yes, it's basically VR chat. And how will this work, you may be asking? Will the country just end up being a digital dystopia? How will citizens' information be kept safe from digital attacks?
Will Fortnite epic gamers invade Tuvalu?
The Tuvalu government's project, Future Now, plans on making a digital government. It'll have to navigate sovereignty by a software and hardware perspective. In terms of software, Tuvalu can go about this two ways. One, have Big Pharma host Tuvalu and users become customers of platforms such as Meta. Or, if Tuvalu wants to preserve some sovereignty, it could host its own servers and make a digital democracy, where one wallet is one vote. But this will have a big problem for local Tuvaluans who can't compete with blockchain miners. Though the second option will definitely be Tuvalu's choice, with the country stating that it'll still hold on to its current EEZ boundary. The Tuvalu government's Future Now project will face some issues. In the digital industry, digital data is currency, and its only real possible hosters are big companies like GoDaddy and Amazon and Google. Tuvalu would be at the mercy of big tech, being able to sell informations to partners and third parties at a whim. So if Tuvalu wants to preserve nearly full control, they can use a user-to-user blockchain, hosting physical servers in Latin America and India, cause it's much cheaper to host a server in Campinas, Brazil than in Silicon Valley. So how would nationhood work by decentralized host companies between sovereign countries? Though the purpose of this project is not to make Tuvalu digital, cause then it would just become a micronation. The intent is, according to Minister Simon Kofe, provide solace to our people and remind our children and grandchildren what our home once was. You're probably thinking, how can Tuvalu prevent itself from sinking? Well, if we look at carbonmap.org and look at emissions, the top countries are what you would expect: China, USA, India. But this map doesn't really give a full perspective since South Africa pollutes more than the UAE. So we'll have to look at a per capita map to look who are really polluting. Yes, you. When we switch it around, the average Emirati pollutes as much as 3 South Africans. I mean, the UAE is an oil giant building Burj Khalifas and artificial clouds, and South Africa can barely keep the lights on. Would you really believe me that North Korea pollutes more CO2 into the air than Romania? Well, it did. But do you really think that the average North Korean pollutes as much as the average Pakistani? Come on, most of them don't even have food. But let's not get carried away. One of the top nations in this chart is Australia. Outside of China, USA, and big developing countries, Australia is definitely the most problematic. Cause the thing is, India needs to industrialize, so does Nigeria, Brazil, etc. But Australia, with a population of 25 million, lower than North Korea, doesn't. 66% of its electricity is generated by coal. Coal! And it's not like Australia needs coal. It has a third of all uranium deposits on Earth, being ranked number 1. So why does Australia use primitive energy sources? Simple answer, lobbying. Australia is notoriously known for its lack of transparent democracy. Not all lobbying have to be disclosed to the public. We are learning today whether businesses made political donations 18 months ago. These lags and other loopholes make it difficult to see how politicians and political parties are being funded, and by whom. So with the dubious laws, oil and fracking companies such as Woodside and ExxonMobil go wild, resulting in the death of the coral reef and the possible poisoning of the Great Australian Bight. So how can Tuvalu face a country such as Australia alone? Well, say hello to AOSIS, the Alliance of Small Island States, a group of nations, 4 of them not islands, accounting to less than 1% of the world's greenhouse emissions, GDP, and population. AOSIS also includes Singapore, but we'll ignore them cause they're not poor, you know. The liability of climate change would cost these nations $570 trillion. Proposals by Tuvalu to change the goal of a climate change limit from 2% to 1.5 Celsius didn't really make any headway. Well, Tuvalu is just another victim of climate change. If nothing is done soon, then global warming will engulf Tuvalu, but the future we can only tell.